What do you think you're doing? This isn't your break room. Can't just come in here and make demands.
I'm not making demands, I'm stating facts.
Will not be spoken to that way.
You need to calm down, sir.
In the towering marble halls of First National Bank, where crystal chandeliers cast dancing shadows across polished granite floors, Michelle moves quietly through the corridors after closing hours. Her cleaning cart wheels squeak softly against the pristine surfaces like a metronome marking time, echoing through the empty spaces every evening at exactly 6 p.m. The scent of expensive leather from executive chairs mingles with the faint aroma of industrial cleaning supplies that cling to her uniform. No one knows she once managed a $500 million hedge fund portfolio that outperformed the S&P 500 by 23% for 3 consecutive years. No one even notices the way her eyes quickly scan the financial documents carelessly left on mahogany desks, absorbing complex data with the precision of a trained analyst. But when the bank's senior executives struggle desperately with their biggest loan default crisis in decades, their voices carrying panic through the thin conference room walls, she observes from behind her humble mop bucket. Her dark hands grip the handle tighter as she hears terms like liquidity crisis and regulatory intervention floating through the air like storm clouds gathering on the horizon. What they didn't know was that Michelle had been quietly analyzing their quarterly financial statements for months, cross-referencing their loan portfolios with market trends, watching their critical mistakes unfold like a slow-motion financial disaster. She'd seen the warning signs they'd missed, identified the solutions they couldn't grasp, and with just one carefully calculated phone call to the right investment firm, she was about to change everything forever. Because sometimes the person you walk past every day without a second glance is the one who holds all the power to save or destroy everything you've built. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody sees coming. Hey everyone, welcome back to another incredible story that will completely change how you see the world around you. Before we dive deeper into Michelle's absolutely mind-blowing journey from invisible to unstoppable, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now if you love stories about hidden strength, quiet dignity, and the most satisfying justice you'll ever witness. Seriously, this story has everything: corporate drama, financial genius, and a plot twist that will leave your jaw on the floor. On a scale of 0 to 10, how much do you believe that extraordinary people are hiding in plain sight all around us? Drop your answer in the comments below because I read every single one of your responses, and I love hearing your thoughts. And trust me, you need to stick around for every single minute of this story, because what Michelle does next will completely blow your mind and restore your faith in justice. This isn't just a story. It's a masterclass in patience, strategy, and the power of quiet brilliance. Michelle Thompson had worked at First National Bank for exactly 3 years, 2 months, and 14 days. Every evening she emptied the same brass trash cans, polished the same imported Italian marble surfaces, and wiped down the same executive desks that once would have been beneath her pay grade. The bank executives, men in $3,000 suits with their Harvard MBAs and inherited connections, walked by her as if she were nothing more than invisible furniture, another piece of the background scenery that kept their world running smoothly. But Michelle watched everything. She always watched. Her keen eyes missed nothing. Not the careless way they left confidential documents spread across their desks, not the hushed phone conversations about failing investments, not the growing tension in their voices as quarterly reports grew more concerning. She watched the way James Peterson, the silver-haired senior vice president, nervously adjusted his Hermes tie during board meetings. She observed how Sarah Chen, the deputy manager, had started working later and later, her usually perfect composure, cracking under pressure. The bank's 19th floor executive suite smelled like old money and fresh anxiety. Persian rugs worth more than most people's cars covered hardwood floors that gleamed under soft lighting. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered breathtaking views of the city skyline. But lately, those windows seemed to frame nothing but storm clouds, gathering on the financial horizon. On that particular Tuesday evening in March, the air conditioning hummed softly as Michelle methodically cleaned the conference room adjacent to Peterson's corner office. The familiar weight of her cleaning. Supplies felt strange in hands that once signed multi-million-dollar contracts. Through the thin walls, she heard something that made her freeze mid-motion, her microfiber cloth suspended inches from the mahogany table surface. We're looking at a catastrophic $50 million exposure on the Morrison commercial real estate account. Peterson's voice carried clearly through the door, tight with barely contained panic. The entire portfolio is underwater. If we can't restructure this debt immediately, we're not just facing our worst quarter in company history. We're looking at potential federal intervention. The regulators are already asking questions. Michelle's pulse quickened as she heard the shuffle of papers, the nervous clearing of throats, the unmistakable sound of powerful men confronting their own limitations. She moved closer to the door, pretending to dust the antique brass door handle, her trained financial mind already processing the implications of what she'd overheard. The Morrison account represents 12% of our total loan portfolio, came another voice. David Kumar, the head of commercial lending, his usually confident tone now edged with desperation. We've got shopping centers, office complexes, residential developments, all leveraged to the hilt and all hemorrhaging cash since the market downturn. Those technical terms weren't foreign to Michelle. They were her native language. Words she'd spoken fluently in boardrooms across Manhattan just a few years ago. Without thinking, she whispered the solution under her breath. Debt-to-equity swap with convertible preferred shares and a structured payment plan based on future cash flows. The conference room fell silent for a moment. Then Peterson's voice cut through the quiet air like a blade. Did someone just say something out there? The door swung open suddenly, and Peterson's steely gray eyes found Michelle still holding her cleaning cloth. His expression shifted from curiosity to barely concealed irritation in the span of a heartbeat. Did the cleaning lady just try to give us financial advice? He said with a smirk that didn't reach his cold eyes. Maybe you should stick to what you know. Mops and buckets. Leave the thinking to people with actual qualifications. The other executives chuckled, the sound, sharp and dismissive in the marble corridor. But deep inside Michelle's chest, something had stirred. Something that had been sleeping for 3 years, but was suddenly, powerfully awake. The very next evening, Michelle arrived for her shift to find the executive floor buzzing with unusual late-night activity. The conference room lights blazed bright against the darkening sky, and she could hear voices growing sharper with mounting desperation as the hours ticked by. The air felt electric with tension, charged with the kind of panic that comes when smart people realize they're out of options. The Morrison deal is bleeding us dry, Peterson's voice carried through the hallway, no longer controlled but edged with genuine fear. Every day we delay, we lose another 100,000 in interest penalties. We need concrete options, and we need them now. Or this bank is going to be front-page news for all the wrong reasons. Sarah Chen's voice joined the discussion. Professional. Composure finally cracking. The regulatory pressure is intensifying. Federal examiners are scheduled for next month. If they see this exposure without a clear resolution plan, they'll classify us as a problem institution. We could be looking at cease and desist orders. Michelle worked methodically around the edges of the chaos, her cleaning cart moving silently across the plush carpeting. But her mind was racing, analyzing every word, every financial detail, building comprehensive solutions that these desperate executives couldn't see through their panic. As she dusted the crystal awards lining the hallway, she heard David Kumar's defeated sigh. We've consulted with 3 different investment banks. McKinsey looked at our books for 2 weeks and came back with restructuring options that would require us to liquidate half our retail branches. Goldman's team suggested a fire sale that would net us maybe 30 cents on the dollar. Without thinking, without considering the consequences, Michelle spoke clearly from the doorway. Section 382 tax loss limitations don't apply if you reorganize under Chapter 11, Sub-Chapter 5. Maintain controlling interest through convertible, preferred shares, establish a payment waterfall based on property performance metrics, and create a management incentive structure tied to portfolio recovery rates. The effect was immediate and complete. Dead silence filled the conference room. Like a physical presence, 8 pairs of eyes, some surprised, some annoyed, some genuinely curious, turned to stare at the woman in the cleaning uniform who had just rattled off a complex financial strategy with the precision of a seasoned investment banker. Peterson's face flushed red as he stood up slowly from his leather chair. "Listen here, sweetheart," he said, his voice dripping with condescension and barely controlled anger. "I don't know where you heard those fancy words, but this is a multi-million-dollar crisis that requires actual expertise. Why don't you stick to what you know, emptying trash cans and mopping floors, and leave the real work to people who actually understand finance?" The other executives murmured agreement, some shaking their heads at the audacity of the help offering unsolicited advice. Sarah Chen looked embarrassed for Michelle, while David Kumar simply turned back to his spreadsheets with dismissive efficiency. But this time, something was different. Michelle didn't shrink away or apologize. Instead, she stood straighter, her shoulders squaring with a confidence that seemed to fill the space around her. She met Peterson's glare with steady, intelligent eyes that held depths he'd never bothered to notice before. "You're right," she said quietly, her voice carrying a new quality. Not defiance, exactly, but something much more dangerous. Absolute certainty. "I should stick to what I know." She walked away, her footsteps echoing down the marble corridor, with more purpose than they'd carried in 3 years. That wasn't just embarrassment burning in her chest anymore. That was 15 years of expertise, 3 Ivy League degrees, and $500 million worth of successful portfolio management, finally. Waking up from its long sleep. As she disappeared around the corner, Michelle allowed herself a small smile. These men had just made a critical error. They dismissed not just her suggestion, but her entirely. And in the world of high-stakes finance, underestimating your competition was often a fatal mistake. Back in the conference room, the executives returned to their crisis management with renewed frustration, unaware that the solution to their problems had just walked out the door. They would spend the next several hours spinning their wheels, generating no new ideas, moving no closer to salvation. Meanwhile, Michelle finished her shift with mechanical precision, but her mind was elsewhere, calculating, planning, remembering skills she'd thought were buried forever. By the time she punched out at midnight, she had already begun to formulate a plan that would change everything. In her modest one-bedroom apartment 15 minutes from downtown, Michelle sat at her small kitchen table surrounded by the ghosts of her former life. The space was clean and functional, but sparse, a far cry from the luxury penthouse she'd once called home. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph, her mother's graduation from nursing school, taken 43 years ago when dreams still seemed achievable and the future stretched endlessly ahead. Michelle reached under her bed and pulled out a leather portfolio case that hadn't been opened in 3 years. Her fingers traced the worn edges before she finally unlatched the brass clasps with hands that trembled slightly. Inside, preserved like artifacts from another lifetime, were the documents that told the story of Michelle Thompson's meteoric rise in the world of high finance. On the very first page, embossed in gold lettering, Goldman Sachs and Company, Senior Portfolio Manager, Michelle Thompson, CFA. The paper still carried the faint scent of expensive offices and power lunches. Below her title, a performance summary that would make any investor weep with envy. A 23% annual return over 5 years, beating the S&P 500 by margins that seemed almost impossible. The pages were filled with deal structures that had saved companies, millions, risk assessments that had prevented catastrophic losses, merger negotiations that had created entire industries. Here was the documentation of the Hartley Industries buyout, a $200 million transaction that she'd orchestrated in just 6 weeks, turning a failing manufacturing company into a profit center that employed thousands. There were letters of recommendation from Fortune 500 CEOs, commendation letters from board chairmen, and photographs from the morning she'd rung the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. Michelle's fingers stopped on a newspaper clipping from the Wall Street Journal. Rising star, Thompson leads record-breaking quarter for Goldman's industrial portfolio. The photo showed a younger version of herself, confident, ambitious, wearing a designer suit that cost more than she now made in 3 months. That woman seemed like a stranger now, someone from a different universe entirely. But as she turned, the pages, the memories came flooding back with startling clarity. The adrenaline rush of closing a complex deal at 2 a.m. while markets in Tokyo were opening. The satisfaction of seeing a carefully planned investment strategy pay off exactly as predicted. The respect in her colleagues' eyes when she walked into a boardroom. The way conversation stopped, and everyone waited to hear what Michelle Thompson had to say. She remembered the final deal she'd worked on, a $75 million debt restructuring for a chain of regional hospitals that were facing bankruptcy. The solution had been elegant in its complexity: convert the debt to equity, bring in strategic partners, create performance incentives that aligned everyone's interests. It had taken her 4 months of 18-hour days, but she'd saved 12 hospitals and nearly 8,000 jobs. The last time she'd touched this portfolio, she'd been rushing out of her corner office at Goldman Sachs, her assistant calling after her with questions about the Henderson merger. But Michelle's phone was ringing with news that changed everything. Her mother had suffered a massive stroke while working her night shift at Presbyterian Hospital. The doctors weren't sure she would survive the next 24 hours. Michelle had made a choice in that moment that defined everything that followed. She requested an indefinite leave of absence, packed up her office, and moved back to her hometown to care for the woman who had raised her alone, working 3 jobs to put Michelle through MIT and Harvard Business School. The medical bills had been staggering, even with insurance, the specialized care, the rehabilitation, the home modifications. It had consumed Michelle's savings with frightening speed. Her mother had survived, thank God, but she would never fully recover. She needed constant care, and Michelle was all she had. So Michelle had made another choice. She'd taken the first job she could find that offered flexible hours and didn't require extensive background checks or references from her previous life. The cleaning position at First National Bank paid $15 an hour and asked no questions about her MIT degree or her CFA certification. It was honest work, that allowed her to care for her mother during the day and still pay the bills. For 3 years, she'd lived this double life. By day, she was a devoted daughter, helping her mother with physical therapy, managing her medications, cooking her favorite meals. By night, she was invisible, just another member of the service staff that kept the financial district running behind the scenes. But now, sitting in her small kitchen with her old life spread out before her, Michelle felt something she hadn't experienced in 3 years: the familiar hunger of a predator who had just spotted prey. These men at First National Bank had a problem they couldn't solve. They were drowning in their own incompetence, and their arrogance had just presented her with an opportunity. Michelle didn't cry as she closed the portfolio. Instead, she opened her laptop, a basic model she'd bought for $400, nothing like the high-end workstation she'd once commanded. But it would do for what she had in mind. She started with First National's public filings, downloading their quarterly reports, analyzing their loan portfolio compositions, studying their board members' backgrounds with the thoroughness of a prosecutor building a case. The bank's problems ran deeper than just the Morrison account. They had systematic issues with risk assessment, outdated portfolio management strategies, and a leadership team that was more concerned with maintaining their positions than actually solving problems. As the hours ticked by and the coffee grew cold, Michelle began to see the complete picture. First National wasn't just facing a crisis, they were facing extinction. But she could see the path to salvation as clearly as if it were printed on a map. "There it is," she whispered to herself as the sun began to rise outside her small window. It was always there. They just never bothered to look. At 4:47 a.m. on a Thursday morning, while the city still slept, and the financial district stood empty except for security guards and early-rising joggers, Michelle Thompson sat in her Honda Civic outside First National Bank's employee entrance. The building towered above her like a monument to money and power, its glass and steel facade reflecting the first pale light of dawn. In her lap lay a manila folder containing 47 pages of the most comprehensive financial restructuring plan she'd ever created. She had spent the entire night working with the focused intensity that had once made her legendary on Wall Street. Every calculation had been double-checked, every legal precedent researched, every potential objection anticipated and addressed. This wasn't just a solution to the Morrison account crisis. It was a complete overhaul of First National's entire approach to commercial lending, risk management, and portfolio optimization. The plan was elegant in its simplicity and devastating in its effectiveness. Rather than the fire sale approach that outside consultants had recommended, Michelle had designed a systematic restructuring that would not only save the Morrison account, but actually turn it into a profit center within 18 months. The key was understanding that the properties weren't fundamentally flawed. They were simply leveraged incorrectly and managed inefficiently. Her solution involved creating a special purpose vehicle that would acquire the distressed properties at a discount, implement aggressive cost-cutting measures and strategic improvements, then either hold them for long-term cash flow or sell them at optimal market timing. The bank would maintain equity stakes in all properties while reducing their immediate cash exposure by 60%. But the Morrison account was just the beginning. Michelle's analysis had revealed similar problems throughout First National's commercial portfolio: outdated risk models, inadequate due diligence procedures, and a fundamental misunderstanding of current market dynamics. Her plan included recommendations for systematic changes that could improve the bank's overall performance by an estimated 15 to 20% within 2 years. Michelle stepped out of her car and walked to the employee entrance, her key card providing access to a world where she'd been invisible for 3 years. The lobby was silent, except for the soft hum of security systems and the distant whisper of climate control. Her footsteps echoed against the marble floors as she made her way to the employee workstation in the basement, a computer terminal that custodial staff used for scheduling and maintenance reports. She logged in with her employee credentials and navigated to the bank's internal suggestion system, a largely ignored portal that management had created to demonstrate their commitment to employee input. In 3 years, Michelle had never seen anyone actually use it for anything meaningful. Her fingers moved across the keyboard with practiced efficiency, uploading her detailed analysis as an anonymous submission. The system required only an employee ID number, which she provided, but no other identifying information. To anyone reviewing the submission, it would appear to come from somewhere within the organization, but the specific source would be untraceable, without deeper investigation. As she typed her cover letter, Michelle felt a familiar thrill, the same electric excitement she'd experienced when closing major deals at Goldman Sachs. This was her element, her natural habitat, and she was playing the game at the highest level once again. The attached analysis addresses the current commercial lending crisis and provides a comprehensive solution that will not only resolve immediate problems, but position First National as a leader in innovative financial services, she wrote. The recommended approach requires minimal additional capital investment while maximizing long-term value creation for all stakeholders. When she finished uploading the document, Michelle looked at the computer screen displaying her submission. Confirmation. 47 pages of financial genius, uploaded anonymously at 5:23 a.m. by employee number 4472. There was nothing else to say, nothing else to do. She quietly logged out and left the building. By 8:45 a.m., Peterson's assistant was reviewing the overnight submissions to the employee suggestion system, a routine task she usually completed in 5 minutes while drinking her first cup of coffee. But this morning was different. This morning, she found something that made her hands shake as she reached for the phone. "Mr. Peterson, you need to see this immediately," she said when he picked up. "Someone has submitted what appears to be a complete solution to our commercial lending problems. It's unlike anything I've ever seen." Within minutes, Peterson was hunched over the printer as page after page of detailed financial analysis rolled out. David Kumar arrived next, then Sarah Chen, then the entire executive team, as word spread through the 19th floor like wildfire. Soon, 12 senior executives stood crowded around Peterson's desk, reading over each other's shoulders, their voices rising with excitement and disbelief. "This is extraordinary," Kumar whispered, his finger tracing the complex calculations that filled the margins. "These projections are not only realistic, they're conservative. The actual returns could be even higher." "Look at this risk analysis," Chen added, her voice tight with amazement. "They've identified vulnerabilities in our current portfolio that our own risk management team missed completely. The plan was flawless. Every financial model was supported by current market data. Every legal strategy was grounded in established precedent. Every operational recommendation was both practical and profitable." Whoever had written this analysis understood not just finance theory, but the brutal realities of implementing complex solutions in the real world. "This could save the bank," Peterson said quietly, the words carrying the weight of absolute truth. "This could do more than save us. This could revolutionize how we do business." Within hours, copies of the anonymous submission were circulating through every department, being analyzed by specialists, forwarded to board members, discussed in emergency meetings. The plan had gone viral through First National's corporate network, generating more excitement and hope than the institution had seen in years. But no one knew who had written it. The submission was anonymous, traceable only to an employee ID number that would require an HR investigation to identify. As the executives celebrated their mysterious salvation, Michelle Thompson was already at home, helping her mother with her morning medications, just another invisible member of the support staff who kept their world running smoothly. The investigation took exactly 37 hours. HR Director Patricia Willis had never seen management so intensely focused on identifying a single employee. The anonymous submission had created a sensation throughout the bank, with board members calling emergency meetings and senior executives speaking in hushed, reverent tones about the mystery genius who had appeared from nowhere to save their institution. The digital footprint leads to Employee Workstation 7 in the basement level, Willis reported to the assembled executive team. The login occurred at 5:23 a.m. last Thursday using employee ID 44722. Peterson's hands were actually shaking as Willis pulled up the employee file on her laptop. The photograph that appeared on the screen caused a collective intake of breath that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the conference room. Michelle Thompson, Willis read from the screen, custodial staff, hired 3 years ago, clean background check, no prior financial industry experience listed, currently assigned to executive floor maintenance. That's impossible, Kumar said, his voice barely above a whisper. The cleaning woman wrote this? The same woman who tried to offer advice earlier this week? Sarah Chen was staring at the employee photo with something approaching horror. We dismissed her. We actually laughed at her when she tried to help us. The realization hit the room like a physical blow. The person they'd been searching for, the financial genius who had crafted their salvation, was someone they saw every day but had never truly seen at all. She had been invisible by choice, not inability, working among them while possessing knowledge and skills that exceeded their own. "Bring her up here," Peterson said quietly. "Right now." 20 minutes later, Michelle Thompson sat in the same conference room where she'd been dismissed just days earlier. But everything was different now. The executives who had once looked through her now studied her with something approaching awe. Her old portfolio binder rested on the polished table between them like evidence in a trial that would determine everyone's future. "You wanted to know who I am," Michelle said, her voice calm and steady despite the magnitude of the moment. "So I'll tell you." She opened the portfolio with deliberate precision, revealing the first page, Goldman Sachs, Senior Portfolio Manager, performance statistics that seemed to glow under the conference room's expensive lighting. The executives leaned forward, their expressions shifting from curiosity to amazement to something that might have been fear. "I managed $500 million in assets for Goldman Sachs," Michelle continued, turning pages that documented a career of extraordinary achievement. "I saved 14 companies from bankruptcy, including the Hartley Industries deal that you probably studied in business school case studies. I built 3 investment funds from the ground up, each outperforming market benchmarks by margins that most analysts considered impossible." She paused at a newspaper clipping showing her ringing the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange. "The Wall Street Journal called me a rising star. Forbes included me in their 40 under 40 list. I was making $2.3 million a year, plus bonuses, when I walked away from it all." Peterson's voice came out as a croak. "Why? Why would you leave all of that to clean your offices?" Michelle finished the question he couldn't bring himself to complete. "Because my mother had a stroke. Because she raised me alone, working 3 jobs so I could have the education that made all of this possible. Because when the doctors said she might not survive, I realized that money and prestige meant nothing if I lost the person I loved most." She turned to a photograph of herself with her mother at her Harvard Business School graduation. The medical bills were staggering. Specialized care, rehabilitation, home modifications. It consumed my savings faster than I thought possible. I needed work that offered flexibility and didn't require explaining my background to people who might not understand my choices. The conference room was silent except for the soft hum of air conditioning and the distant sounds of the city below. These men who commanded millions of dollars and wielded enormous power suddenly felt very small in the presence of someone who had sacrificed everything for love. "I didn't leave finance," Michelle said, closing the portfolio with quiet dignity. "Finance never left me. I just had to walk away for something more important than profit margins and performance bonuses. But I never stopped watching, never stopped analyzing, never stopped understanding this world better than most of the people who never had to leave it." She looked around the table, meeting each executive's eyes with steady confidence. "Every night for 3 years, I've cleaned your offices and listened to your problems. I've seen your mistakes, watched your struggles, understood your limitations. You're good at your jobs, but you're not exceptional. You're comfortable, but you're not visionary." Sarah Chen found her voice first. "The plan you submitted, it's not just good, it's revolutionary. How did I see solutions that your teams missed?" Michelle smiled for the first time since entering the room. "Because I wasn't protecting my position or worried about office politics. I was just solving problems, which is what I've always done best." In that quiet moment, with afternoon sunlight streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows, they finally saw Michelle Thompson not as the invisible cleaning woman who had served them for 3 years, but as the financial mastermind who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The revelation was both humbling and terrifying. How many other extraordinary people had they overlooked? How much potential had they missed because they only saw uniforms instead of minds? The balance of power in the room had shifted completely. The executives who had once dismissed Michelle with casual arrogance now realized they were sitting across from someone whose expertise dwarfed their own, whose track record made their careers look mediocre by comparison. But Michelle Thompson had not come here for revenge or humiliation. She had come to reclaim her place in a world that had always been hers, and to show these men what true leadership looked like. The next morning, Michelle Thompson walked into First National Bank for what she knew would be the last time as a custodial employee. But instead of heading to the service elevator that had carried her to the basement for 3 years, she found herself facing something unprecedented. The entire lobby staff had gathered, creating a human corridor from the entrance to the executive elevators. The silence was profound and weighted with emotion. Maria Santos, a teller who had never spoken to Michelle beyond polite nods, stepped forward with tears in her eyes. "You saved our jobs," Maria said, her voice carrying clearly through the marble space. They were talking layoffs, branch closures, people losing everything they'd worked for. "But you changed everything." The applause began slowly, just Maria clapping, then spreading to the other tellers, the security guards, the administrative assistants, the loan officers, every person who had ever seen Michelle walking quietly through their workplace without truly seeing her at all. The sound built and echoed off the marble walls until the entire first floor thundered with appreciation. Tom Bradley, a security guard who had worked at the bank for 15 years, wiped his eyes as he clapped. "I've got 3 kids and a mortgage. This job is everything to my family. Thank you doesn't seem like enough." But the transformation was just beginning. Later that same morning, the board of directors convened an emergency session that would be remembered as the most important in First National's 127-year history. The boardroom, usually filled with careful deliberation and political maneuvering, crackled with unprecedented energy as 12 board members reviewed Michelle's plan for the third time. "The numbers don't lie," said board chairman William Hartwell, his normally reserved demeanor animated with excitement. "This isn't just a solution to our current crisis. It's a blueprint for making First National the most innovative regional bank in the country." The vote was unanimous and swift. Michelle Thompson would be named Chief Financial Officer, making her the highest-ranking black woman in the bank's entire history, and one of the youngest C-suite executives in the regional banking industry. Her starting salary would be $450,000 annually, plus performance bonuses, with a signing bonus that reflected both her value to the organization and their recognition of the years they had undervalued her contributions. But Michelle had conditions. She would accept the position only if the bank committed to fundamental changes in how it recognized and developed talent. A new scholarship program would be created in her mother's honor, providing full college funding for children of service, industry workers. Every employee, regardless of position, would have access to quarterly performance reviews and advancement opportunities. The bank would implement a policy requiring management to consider internal candidates for leadership positions before seeking external hires. "We've learned a painful lesson about overlooked talent," Peterson admitted during the board meeting. "We won't make that mistake again." 3 weeks later, Michelle stood before the packed auditorium of the State Banking Association's annual conference. 500 of the most powerful people in regional finance filled the seats, their attention focused entirely on the woman whose story had already become legendary in banking circles. She had accepted their invitation to deliver the keynote address under one condition. She would speak not just about financial strategy, but about the human cost of institutional blindness. "How many brilliant minds are you walking past every day?" Michelle asked, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium's perfect acoustics. "How many solutions are you ignoring because they come from unexpected places? How many people with extraordinary capabilities are right there in your offices, your branches, your communities, waiting for someone to see beyond their current circumstances?" The audience was completely silent, hanging on every word. "I spent 3 years cleaning the offices of people who desperately needed help I could provide, not because I wasn't qualified, but because they never looked beyond my uniform to see who I really was. That's not just their loss. It's a systematic failure that costs our entire industry." She paused, letting the weight of her words settle over the room. Excellence has no color, no gender, no predetermined address or accent or background. It exists everywhere, in forms you might not expect, carried by people you might overlook. Your job as leaders is not to find people who look like success as you define it. Your job is to recognize success wherever it lives. The applause that followed lasted for 4 minutes and 12 seconds. Every person in that auditorium stood, many with tears in their eyes, understanding that they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not just a speech, but a transformation of how they would think about leadership forever. Michelle's plan was implemented exactly as she had designed it. The Morrison account was restructured successfully, saving the bank $50 million in potential losses and generating $12 million in additional revenue within the first year. But more importantly, her systematic changes to risk assessment and portfolio management improved First National's overall performance by 18% in the first quarter alone. The bank's stock price rose 34% in the 6 months following her appointment. They were featured on the cover of Banking Weekly as Regional Bank of the Year. Other institutions began recruiting their employees, trying to understand the secret behind First National's remarkable turnaround. But the secret wasn't complicated. They had simply stopped overlooking the extraordinary person who had been there all along. Today, 18 months after that transformative morning in the conference room, Michelle Thompson arrives at First National Bank each day through the executive entrance, but her heart remains with the people she once worked beside in invisible roles. Her corner office on the 20th floor, with its panoramic view of the city and its imported furniture, contains one addition that visitors always notice: a small, framed photograph of her mother in her nursing uniform, smiling proudly at her daughter's graduation. The mentorship program Michelle created has become a model for banks across the region. 15 employees have been promoted to management positions, including Maria Santos, who is now Assistant Branch Manager, and Tom Bradley, who heads the new Customer Service Excellence Initiative. The scholarship program bearing her mother's name has provided full college funding to 37 students, creating opportunities that might never have existed otherwise. Every evening at 6 p.m., Michelle still walks through the executive floors, but now she stops to talk with the custodial staff, learning their names, understanding their dreams, seeing them as complete human beings rather than invisible service providers. She has implemented a policy requiring all management staff to spend time in operational roles, ensuring that no one in leadership position can forget the humanity of the people who keep their institution running. The bank's performance continues to exceed all projections. Michelle's innovative approaches to commercial lending and risk management have been adopted by institutions nationwide. She receives speaking invitations from Harvard Business School, Goldman Sachs, and the Federal Reserve, but she measures her success not in profit margins or performance bonuses, but in the number of people who have been seen, valued, and given opportunities to reach their potential. 6 months ago, she received a call from her former colleagues at Goldman Sachs, offering her a position as managing director with a salary that would have doubled her current income. Michelle listened politely, thanked them for their consideration, and declined without hesitation. She had found something more valuable than money or prestige, the knowledge that she was building something meaningful, creating change that would outlast any individual career. Her mother's health has stabilized, and she now lives in a comfortable assisted living facility where Michelle visits every evening after work. They share dinner and talk about the day's victories: the young teller who got accepted to business school, the security guard whose innovative safety protocol was implemented company-wide, the custodial supervisor who was promoted to facilities management. "You know what I'm most proud of?" Michelle asked her mother just last week, as they sat together watching the sunset through the facility's large windows. "What's that, baby?" "That I never forgot who raised me. That I never forgot where real strength comes from. That when I had to choose between success and love, I chose love, and somehow ended up with both." Her mother squeezed her hand, the same hands that had worked 3 jobs to put Michelle through school, the same hands that had applauded from the audience when Michelle rang the opening bell at the New York Stock Exchange all those years ago. "I always knew you'd change the world," her mother said softly. "I just didn't know you'd do it by cleaning offices first." Today, when Michelle walks through First National Bank, she sees something that didn't exist 3 years ago: an institution that values every person who contributes to its success. The marble floors still gleam, the executive offices still command respect, but now there's something else. A recognition that extraordinary people exist everywhere, waiting for someone brave enough to see past uniforms and job titles to recognize the brilliance underneath. Because sometimes the person cleaning your office is the one who can save your company. Sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one everyone thinks is powerless. And sometimes the greatest victory isn't reaching the top. It's remembering everyone you meet along the way and lifting them up as you climb. Michelle Thompson learned that true leadership isn't about commanding from corner offices or impressing people with credentials. It's about seeing potential where others see only service, recognizing genius where others see only labor, and understanding that the most profound changes often come from the most unexpected places. The financial world took notice of First National's transformation, but they missed the real story. It wasn't about one woman's rise from custodian to CFO. It was about an entire institution learning to see clearly for the first time, discovering that excellence had been walking their halls all along, quietly waiting for someone to notice. In her final speech to the Banking Association, Michelle left them with words that would be quoted in business schools for years to come. Respect isn't earned by titles or salaries or corner offices. Respect is earned by how you treat the person who has nothing to offer you except their humanity. And recognition isn't about finding the right people. It's about recognizing that the right people might already be there, invisible only because you've chosen not to see them. What did you think of Michelle's incredible journey? Hit that like button if you believe that everyone deserves to be seen for who they really are, not just what they appear to be. Subscribe for more amazing stories of hidden strength, quiet, dignity, and the kind of justice that restores your faith in humanity. Share this with someone who needs to remember that their current circumstances don't define their potential. And remember, the next time you encounter someone in a service role, take a moment to really see them. You might just be looking at the person who could change everything, if only someone gave them the chance to show what they're truly capable of. Until next time, keep watching for the extraordinary in the ordinary. Keep believing in the power of recognition, and keep remembering that sometimes the most important stories are about the people we walk past every day without truly seeing. Because in a world that often values appearance over substance, titles over talent, and status over character, Michelle Thompson's story reminds us that true greatness doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It works quietly, serves humbly, and waits patiently for the moment when the world is ready to see what was. Always there,